As always, Metro Arts' mission is to drive an equitable and vibrant community through the arts. I am Commissioner Tim Jester chairing today. We have, along with me, Commissioner Leah Love, Commissioner Carol McCoy, Commissioner Dewana Wade is not present, Interim Director Dr. Paulette Coleman, and Grants Manager or Director Sydney Davis. Okay, got everybody there? Pursuant to the provisions of Tennessee Code Annotated 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. We just went through this. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to assure that time and procedural requirements are met. With that, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we have one public comment. Ms. Ashley Batchelder. If you can come over.
Sorry, I failed to mention that Vivian Fox is here, making sure everything runs smoothly today as well.
Do my best. All right, your time starts now.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I will say my name in case any of the new commissioners are watching this. Ashley Batchelder from the MHRC. I've been one of your main liaisons with the Title VI complaint. And so I am, you all already know, but I'm happy to say that we finalized the agreement on Friday. And just want to thank Dr. Coleman, Commissioner Jester, Commissioner Watts, the others who I'm sure were part of conversations as we move towards that, getting it across the finish line as well. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with y'all on the compliance agreement. And just want to clearly say that we don't intend or mean or want the agreement to slow anything down. I know I've gotten some questions about it, and we haven't had a big public conversation about it. And so just wanted to say that, and then wanted to use the last part of my comments here to say a few words around the question of disparity studies that have come up in the Oversight Committee a few times now. And this is really what was at the heart of the MHRC legal analysis, is this question over what is a disparity study, when is it needed? And you have two resources available for you, the memo that was provided by Griffin and Strong and the memo that was provided by the MHRC, that I would say answer different questions. One is if you want to do race-based grants, what is required? And one is how do you consider and acknowledge and look at racial data while not using a disparity study still. And so disparity studies are legal mechanisms if you want to do things a certain way, right? And so the conversations that I've seen, I haven't necessarily heard this commission say that you think you need a disparity study. But this is what the MHRC is really here to engage with y'all about as well. And so we hope to talk more about this.
Thank you.
And that concludes our public comment.
All right. With that, have you all had a chance to peruse the minutes for the May 30, 2024 meeting? And if so, I would be willing to hear a motion for approval.
I move to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve from Commissioner McCoy, second from Commissioner Love. Thank you. All right, with that, we'll move on to updates. The first one we have here, I'm sorry? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. With that, we will move on to updates. So for fiscal year 24, the payment update is that all but two payments have been made. There were two additional payments that were added to the list of payments that are in process at this point. This is my understanding, and if you'd like to offer any sort of clarity, you're welcome to, Councilor Ortiz-Marsh. Go ahead.
Of the two additional payments, one of those payments has been fully processed. and that payment is in the hands of that artist. And the second additional payment is going through our normal process of letter, receipt, and processing. And this is notwithstanding the group of artists in the in the MHRC.
So the second group of artists who we are going to be paying, the mural artists, and I think the artists who received grants from both Thrive and from organizational grants those are still outstanding, but they're in the process of beginning to be paid, right?
Yeah, and of that second group, there is a group of micro small organizations that also are Thrive recipients, and some of them are not Thrive recipients, and they're just small micro organizations for operating grants.
So we move forward one step at a time with those. Anybody have any questions or anything they want to add about the FY24 second payment updates? Okay. So as Ms. Batchelder noted, we have reached a conciliation agreement, and as of, I believe, Friday, all parties have signed. So that is great progress forward. I believe it's a public document at this point, so it is available to be perused by anyone who wants to, so we're not going to go through it line by line today. But there is one point of the conciliation agreement that I just wanted to mention. I've heard some questions asked around why people might think that Metro Arts was canceling or not having a Thrive grant cycle this year. And I just want to be clear that that is not the case. Metro Arts has had that responsibility moved at this point to a working group that's going to be comprised of representatives from legal, representatives from Metro Finance, and then somebody from MHRC, and then the Arts Commission, and there's going to be a working group, and then one additional person to be determined, and that working group is going to be working together to come up with a compliant or legal way to be able to fund individual artists. So this is not Metro Arts putting Thrive on the back burner or canceling a funding session. It was literally part of the conciliation agreement that we would put together a working group and come up with a way to continue or to strengthen the Thrive process. So just wanted to be able to clarify that. We can move on to operating grants. So let's talk a little bit about the closeout report for fiscal 24. And Dr. Coleman, would you like to address this?
Yes. And because our grants director has been intimately involved, I will call on her to supplement whatever I say. Basically, we had talked of it in terms of a closeout report. We are in the process of completing our FY24 annual report. Ideally, the ideal time to have done that would have been at the same time we were doing the budget, et cetera. But as we all know, there were a lot of different things going on. We have to complete it expeditiously because it is required for the release of our grants funding to have the annual report on file. That report will basically summarize what we have done this year, identifying some of the challenges, and also projections. And I think that's really important, that as we move forward, there's been a lot going on, the internal audit, the conciliation agreement, closing out grants, and all of that will be covered in that annual report. We are hoping to have it in the coming weeks, and that's basically all I have to say. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, any more details?
No, and commissioners, in your packet, there is actually a list of the individuals that receive funding on the Thrive individual artist side and the organizational side. So in terms of the numbers that will be in that annual report, this is what will come from grants in terms of how much was paid out and to whom and for why, some of the general questions that were asked of us to be put in that report. So if you were questioning what this list was, that's what's primarily going to make up the annual report.
And just FYI, in fiscal year 2024, there were a total of $4,250,724.32 awarded in grants.
Yes, sir.
It does occur to me that I think there's a rather important fact that I missed or skipped over when we were talking about the conciliation agreement, but since we're talking about grants, it still seems applicable. There are just over, how many Thrive grants are there outstanding right now, Sydney? It's just over 100.
No, Thrive is 201.
201. And those are outstanding right now, but because of the direction that conciliation has chosen to go with finding a way to bring Thrive into compliance, we're going to have to take those applications and rework them from scratch. So I think given the new parameters that the working group is going to come up with, we're going to have to cancel those applications and start those application processes over again when we have a new structure in place. Any questions or comments about that? I know that's a pretty big move to have to make, but there really is no other way to be able to accept those old applications under a new format.
I think it's very important to note that these decisions were not decisions of Metro Arts, but are a result of the conciliation agreement that consisted of 4 agencies. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the attorneys for working so diligently to come up with processes and outcomes that the parties could agree upon. The signatures have been received from Metro Arts, Metro Human Relations Commission, Metro Legal, Metro Finance, and the 6 complainants who originally lodged the complaint with Metro Human Relations Commission. Thank you.
I'd just like to reiterate that what Dr. Coleman said, that this was not a decision of Metro Arts or the Grants and Funding Committee. This is purely a matter of something that was decided in the conciliation process. And so the canceling of the current applications has nothing to do with the desire to move forward in a positive manner with funding individual artists directly. We're just going to do it through a manner that this working group comes up with that allows it to be an even stronger program than it has been over the last 10 years.
And and if I can just put it in layman's terms, essentially you'll receive an email that the submittable application that was sent in was voided, but that the only word that is able to be described within submittable is declined. And so we don't want anyone to think that once they get this email that their application has been declined, that they are being removed from consideration for any future funding. It is just quite literally the only way to not have those applications in a pending status on submittable, so that when the work group comes up with, and it could be the exact same thing, but the exact same application, the same format, but we want it so that it's starting anew and that no one is confused, or if there's any old language that doesn't match whatever the work group comes up with. So it's more or less housekeeping at this stage than it is an actual determining decision for the future. So.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move towards operating funds restructuring, and this is where I think the majority of our time is going to be spent. But Sydney Davis has been working very hard on putting together a resource package and working on a way that we can take the grants process for operating grants that we already had and strengthen it and bring back some of the attributes of a stronger grant program that were there maybe 5 or 6 years ago that somehow disappeared over the last several years. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sydney to start talking a little bit about this grants process for operating grants.
I'm sorry? What was the date for us to be able to start grants again next year?
September.
Okay, I couldn't remember.
Summer and September.
Yeah. So currently, we have within the conciliation process a date of September of 2025 when we're able to start operating grants. Pretty much any funding again, but operating grants again. And so at our last, I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
At our last meeting for the committee, the commissioners would have received the resource guide that had a proposed operating, a proposed new way to do operating grants. And I think now we're at a point that we have time. We don't need to make any, immediate decisions. And some of the conversations that we were having was to finally make this available to the full commission so that we can have comments, concerns, and really just start the brainstorming that we have until September 25 to be able to get this started. Obviously, we don't want to wait until September 25. The goal is that once we're able to start this process, that we can hit the ground running. But there's a lot of decisions, a lot of understanding that we need to have in the in-between.
And so my understanding is that the grants process can start in September, but we have to have the new guidelines approved by January so we can take those to Metro Council for approval.
Yes, and that's a 6-week process to get approved by resolution from the Metro Council as well. So really, we're looking at August for things to start getting buttoned up. So this was shared with you previously, and so I guess the conversation today is: do we have any questions about it? Anything before we start bringing this into a bigger conversation piece with the full commission?
So we can move the timeline along as quickly as possible, but still be thorough. I think if we can talk about it today and answer questions, then I will discuss it in our commission meeting on Thursday during the grants funding committee report. And I think it would be hopeful that by the next commission meeting, we could have made a recommendation that the commission accept these grant funding criteria before we take them to Metro Council. Did you have a question, Commissioner McCoy?
I don't have a question. I was hoping maybe Sydney or someone could just briefly summarize what's in that, because I left my packet at home. I read it, and last time we had this meeting, I really liked it. I just want to be refreshed as to why I really liked it.
Well, most of the eligibility requirements, and I can give this to you, pretty much I'm looking for permission to email this to all of the commissioners and not just those on the grants funding committee, so that when Thursday comes, we can have a more robust, full commission conversation about it. Within this proposed workflow, if you want to hand it to her, pretty much everything is staying the same in terms of the use of getting things confirmed through the committee as well as the council. We're still using panelists to do scoring. A lot of the work, and still having a technical grants review by staff. The biggest change, or what I would assume would be the biggest change, is that instead of a percentage scoring, it's based off of, let me see if I can find my exact words here so I'm not misspeaking. Okay, the funding model for operating support grants would include a departure from traditional formula percentage-based allocation system and move to a ranking of final scores as determined by the panel reviews. Applying organizations would be scored with an assessment score of 0 to 100. The final score would determine the amount in which an organization is awarded. So this was based off of, just an example here, based off of a $2.5 million budget for operating, is that the department would be budgeted to award the top 60 applicants. So it's based off of the application. Which has been mulled over more times than not to make sure that we're still hitting certain equity standpoints within the application itself. And in this case, based off of a $2.5 million budget, the allocation would prioritize excellence, with the top 10% receiving $80,000, the subsequent 20 recipients receiving $50,000, and then the remaining 30 recipients allocated to 24. So that way we're not having a lion's share of operating funds going to any particular size organization. Those who may have more resources when filling out this grants application, that if I was a first-time grant applicant, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 questions on this, most which are the exact same, if not maybe updated a little bit, just now knowing what we know about our organization, or about our grants process currently and the things that are pending, that based on this application alone and based on the panelists' opinions and decisions, we'll give them a score. So instead of just, because when I was going through some of the applications, I noticed that there were a lot of markouts, essentially, that an application would have, I don't know, a 60 on it. And then for no reason, no notes, no nothing, I couldn't find why the score had went up or down, even when you go and you compare it to what the panelists had said. And so in this way, there's only one document that really has to be reflected upon, and it's the application itself. That obviously we would still have certain DE&I and anti-racist trainings with the panelists that would hopefully be led by the Office of DE&I here in Nashville. And one of the other things is I would love to have our care committee also be our major sounding board for that decision as well, just so we can keep the essence of what was in our application from last year, but make the math a little bit easier and to be followed. That way right now, the grants department within Metro Arts is me. it's just me, and I want to make sure that I can give my as much time and effort to each organization as possible.
How many people are you planning on having in the grants review process, and where do they come from?
And so the panelists are through applications, and that number is determined by how many applications we receive.
So it's a pretty broad number.
So roughly, if we had 100 applications, we would need anywhere between 10 and 13 people to be on that panel to do the scoring itself. And that comes from the community. Those are community members.
So if you had 100 applicants, are you the one that goes through the application process, or are they drawn by lottery? Or
application for panelists or application
for the panelists?
So that's one of the things that we've been having conversations about, where I do not want to be the person that's making that singular decision. I think that gives too much of the wrong type of power to one individual, regardless of who's sitting in the Strategic Grants and Initiatives Manager position. And so one of the things that I'm hoping is that we're going to be working with our Restorative Arts Department to figure out a way to make that decision without it coming from a singular voice. So I don't necessarily want it to just strictly come from this commission or to come from the executive director. I want it to come from multiple people who have a different levels of buy-in about how we choose these panelists, since we are putting so much weight on the application itself now.
I also want to add that one of the things that we are doing is that because Sydney has been a solo department person, we are allowing the people from restorative arts up to 50% of their time to be devoted to grants processing. And so that will help us in a lot of ways, because it can be overwhelming with the high volume. And it also gives more people from the staff an opportunity to be involved and and to reflect the philosophy and the orientations that we have about grants being available and accessible to the totality of our community.
Thank you.
As I'm sitting here thinking, it just occurred to me that the January date and the September date are dates that came out of the conciliation agreement that really only apply to Thrive, right? And so if we are able to send this to commission for approval and then immediately to council for their approval, there's no reason why we couldn't begin facilitating a grant process much quicker than the grant process outlined in conciliation for Thrive. So I know we threw January and September out there, but let's have a conversation around that, because I don't think it needs to take till September of 25 to do this potentially.
No, but the information that I've received is that 25 is our starting line. And so if that's not the case and we're all in agreement, that's fine. I think we can, but I do worry, how fast government moves around the holidays.
I think the general point though is that we don't have to wait we
No,
can
we don't have to.
move things forward as quickly as possible, so we can get funding back out into the arts community. And September isn't a hard and fast date. If we can do this at a quicker pace, we'll do it at a quicker pace.
No, and I think that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation now is so that if we can, we will, but at least we have one hard date to hold ourselves to if the sky just falls out. So, but I am hoping that we can do this sooner rather than later, because the goal is for us to be able to support the artists within the community. So.
Any other questions or considerations? We don't need to make any sort of motion in order to approve sending this out to members of the CARE community and the rest of the CARE committee and the rest of the commission, right? Counselor?
No, that would just be a general policy decision.
Yeah, so then I would say let's, as long as other commissioners agree, let's make this as widely public as possible.
There is also a requirement, even though it's specific to Thrive, that there will be a community meeting facilitated by MHRC, particularly so that I think it's a complainant and others can share their experiences, and this would be a way of informing our revisions with this community meeting. There is also, so just wanted to bring that to our attention and to help us incorporate it into the work we do.
Would that be in reference to operating grants, or is that going to be in reference to just Thrive?
Well, it's specifically Thrive, but it obviously can inform our grant-making process across the board.
And I figured since we have, we have people within the public here who are interested in this, and I'm just going to state it so if you need to and you want to go back and watch, that the proposed grant application categories would include questions in the categories of first-time applicant, accessibility, the art, the organization, a financial health assessment, community impact, and then equity. And so that's where the questions are stemming from. There's 9 questions. And we would obviously make this application available as well, so that you can see that it's not too far off from a lot of the conversations that were happening over the last few summers, and that it just looks a little different, but the essence and the work and the sweat equity that went into creating an application in the last few years are still highly recognized within this application. It's just to make the scoring a little bit more succinct, so that you know exactly how many points is worth one particular question, and that when we do panel training, the technical panel training, not the equity and the anti-racist training, but that there's a clear understanding of this is worth 1 point, this is worth 10 points, this is worth 15 points, so that it can be as transparent as possible. So.
Any other questions? Or I'm going to recognize Commissioner Lefkowitz from the audience.
Hello. I have questions for the minutes because I just want to make sure. Is the idea, too, thinking about, just so I'm clear, aligning the operating and Thrive decisions, and even though that operating is not part of that agreement because of the allocation of resources? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So in other words, is that part of the idea, is that we're aligning the work of the working group around Thrive with the operating grant process because of to ensure that equitable allocation of resources? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and the answer is the total package of resources allocated for grants is in the neighborhood of $3 million. Right. Not exactly, but in that neighborhood. And the amount budgeted for Thrive in the recent history has been only $200,000. So there has to be some discussion about how the big pot is appropriated.
Great. That's perfect. And then my second question is, and this isn't for the minutes, this is just for my brain, in terms of communicating you mentioned the people who'd applied for Thrive will get that, their submittable canceled. Are there plans for other communications to them to clarify kind of the process? And then also, I guess I want to ask about operating grant applicant.
Doing some juggling over here. Operating and Thrive, the applications live in the same place, so both Operating and Thrive will both receive, they'll both receive that same email from Submittable.
The operating will receive the cancellation.
I mean, as of right now, that's where we're leaning towards because of the introduction of this. I don't see how we can keep those applications, seeing that the goal is to change the application itself. Yeah.
But there will maybe be additional information provided to them?
Yeah, so it's dependent on, so the way that this worked in my head is that if they decided that they did not want to push this to the bigger commission, then we would have to start the conversation over about what we were going to do with those applications. But until this is signed, sealed, and delivered by the larger commission, nothing is going to happen with the organizational applications. But if this is voted on to be moved forward with, then it will. So as of right now, nothing will, but it can and it probably will, depending on what the decision is from the larger commission about this proposal. Does that make sense? Okay.
I would also like to share that given the challenges we have had with just communicating via what Submittable said, we will also be sending some kind of correspondence, email or something to clarify, because the one sentence is efficient, but it also creates a lot of questions and anxiety and concerns. So we want to be as forthcoming as possible, and to send out an email would not be impossible, provided we have accurate addresses. And that was something we discovered in the closeout, that organizations and or individuals move and don't necessarily, their mail doesn't get forwarded.
Dr. Coleman or Ms. Davis, can we send out a correspondence before the information comes out from Submittable so they know when they get that, what that means?
Yes, and so you got me, because we were getting ready to get there. And so I was like, I wanted to make sure that this is what we wanted to do first, so that I could make sure that whatever email that we were sending out reflected the decision of this committee currently before we did anything. So right now, the email would read that there's talks of a new proposal, and as of right now, what's sitting in Submittable for organizational grants, for operating grants, is still pending, still paused, but Thrive, as we've determined, it'll be removed from Submittable because that's based on what the work group comes up with. Is that a fair assessment of what I'm understanding here?
If it's possible to send two different emails, one to Thrive recipients concerning their applications, and then one to operational applicants regarding theirs, so it's not the same. Yeah, then that sounds fair. I think putting all into one email and sending it to everybody might cause some confusion.
No, I wasn't saying one email. I was saying, like, are those two ideas where we're sitting at currently? Because I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I guess I'll just take this opportunity to say that the idea or the actual operational part of canceling applications and starting over again is not something that this committee or the commission takes lightly. I think it's rather unfortunate that we found ourselves in this particular position, but there really is no way to start at the ground floor and build backup programs that will last the test of time and be as without reproach as possible without starting over again. And so for those listening that are discouraged or angry or sad that applications are being canceled, we're sorry about that. We will do our best to manage Metro Arts in a way moving forward where we don't end up in this position again.
So Commissioner Jester, so as soon as this guide needs to go out to the commission immediately.
Yeah, I think that as long as everyone here is in agreement, I think it needs to go to the commission. I think it needs to go to the care committee. I think it needs to be made as widely public as possible for feedback and for people to be able to read through it and understand it clearly.
Is this something that we're looking to, or I'm not sure, can we vote on this on Thursday? to move forward with it, or is that, or what?
So I would say the agenda isn't noticed appropriately for a decision from the commission to be made on this for an item for vote. Also, per the MHRC agreement, there is the requirement to have the meeting with our stakeholders, if you will, and so it would be legal's opinion that before this goes to vote before the commission, that we get all relevant feedback per the MHRC agreement, and then per the care committee, all these other interested parties have feedback, that whatever feedback comes from that is incorporated into these guidelines. That comes back before this grants committee. The committee then approves a finalized version, and that finalized version goes to the commission for approval. And then from there, that becomes a criteria, and that has to go before Metro Council.
So it would be my, what I'd like to do is talk about these criteria in the Grants and Funding Committee report on Thursday. And so we can use that as an opportunity to let the other commissioners know that if they haven't seen it in their inbox, it's there already. And just another general announcement that this is widely available for comment. And then we could hopefully vote on it at our next Grants and Funding Committee meeting, which should be before the next commission meeting, and recommend it to the full commission.
I think that's why I was naturally leaning that even though we don't have to be held to that January, September, that maybe we lean towards it, because there has to be a robust amount of conversation about this. Because reasonably, the last time that we talked about this was in May, and I want to make sure that and we've had a lot of changes, a lot of different discussions in the meanwhile. So if we can do it sooner, absolutely. But if not, then we've built in enough time to be able to have enough feedback and opinion come back, so that if changes need to be made before we send it off to council, then we have it.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we got the timeline and information on the record so people can hear what our next steps are. So thank you.
All right, Commissioner Lefkowitz.
For the minutes, what I'm hearing, I just want to be sure we're talking about having the guidelines and then having the community feedback and engagement, which is in the MHRC agreement, and then our committees review it, grants, care, legal reviews, and then it goes to the commission and then to council.
Yes, I think the only part of that I'm questioning is that I think that MHRC conciliation agreement specifically applies to Thrive. So I don't know that it requires us to get community feedback for operational grants, but I think we should do that. But I'm not sure that's because of the conciliation agreement. Am I right or wrong about that?
I think it does say about the new grant policies that by October 15th, there needs to be community engagement around those.
Around operational?
So, sorry, I'm going to jump in as a lawyer. Page 6.
Yeah, thank you.
Number 4. It does not specifically state Thrive. It just says the Metro Arts grant process and procedures, and I read that to include operating grants.
Okay, good. Well, I think it's necessary. I just wasn't sure it was demanded by that document, but that makes sense, and I think it's necessary anyway. So
I advise that it includes operating grants.
Chair Jester, I have a question.
Commissioner McCoy.
Thank you. I am thinking about the panels that will review all these applications, and it's my understanding that these would be volunteers, unpaid people. Number one, is that correct?
As of now, there are other cities around the United States that do pay their commissioners, but right now, pay their panelists, not commissioners. Wouldn't that be nice? No, pay their panelists, just to be clear, for the minutes.
Yeah. So they've been paid in the past as well.
I know they got paid, but I know before that they were volunteers.
Yeah, and we've had a few conversations in regard to that. We find that we get a more diverse and robust group of individuals who want to be panelists and can be panelists, because we do pay them for the sake of not everyone has the privilege of taking off an entire day, or within the guidelines we say that you'll probably spend 2 weeks scoring the amount of applications that you're getting. And most of these artists, most people who are panelists are an artist in some form or fashion. And we want to make sure that that time that they're taking away from their craft, while also thus supporting the community, is still being supported financially, because I'm paid by salary. So if I take an additional 2 hours every night to do something, I'm essentially volunteering my time. But these individuals who are most likely not paid in that capacity, it would be an active decision for them to take away time that they could be using towards a project to be able to do this, which should be their right, because they want to support their artist community. But I think that's the justification for why we're paying them. And that is common practice amongst most major cities.
My second question is, what do you do to ensure that you don't have professional volunteers, people that come back every year and do the review? How do you make certain that you get new blood doing the evaluations in the next year and the following year? And do you have these repeat evaluators coming with a set agenda rather than new people?
Well, I mean, I haven't necessarily seen.
I mean, it's brand new right now.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't necessarily seen things that track with that understanding, but I will say that the goal is for us to have different stakeholders within the panelist decision, so that everything that we're doing is coming from an equitable and community-driven decision-making place. So, I mean, it's definitely noted, and I hear it, and I'll make sure that whenever we're making these guidelines and criteria, that, you know, that we don't have anything fishy or finicky going on. But for the most part, I haven't seen that historically, and we'll make sure that moving forward, when these panelists are decided, that it's coming. Again, this is why I said I don't want a singular decision in picking panelists, for this exact reason. I want a certain level of bias that I can't have in this situation.
I would just make a suggestion that if somebody is a panel reviewer, that they don't have a term more than 2 or 3 years, and then they have to rotate out of the process for a few years. They can come back in later. But that's something, as far as criteria, that you might consider when you're looking at selection of panelists.
We will definitely note that in our workshopping.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked at all about bringing the care committee into panelist selection?
Well, just in all things that we do. I think that was kind of the big reason why we had, I use this word passively, but so many consultants, is because we weren't using the resources that we already had available to us within our department, within the actual agency. So I know CARE is currently working on redoing their guidelines, as well as defining what equity means for Metro Arts and how we're going to use it in our grant making and grant decision making. So I use it loosely, but the goal is that once they've started figuring out some of their criteria, that we can use it as a baseline for ours. And so I realistically, I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know that with the conversations that I've been having with Claudia and Josiah and Commissioner Trey, or Commissioner Harding, apologies, where our goal is to work very intimately together to make sure that we have at least 2 or 3 different voices that are shaping the way that we do grants at any given time. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or thoughts or conversation around the new resource guide? So just as a quick review or overview, at some point shortly after this meeting, we're going to make the resource guide as widely accessible as possible, sending it to the care committee, to the rest of the commissioners. I'll be discussing it in the grants overview or at the commission meeting on Thursday, and we will hopefully move for recommending this to the broader commission at the next commission meeting after the one this Thursday. Commissioner McCoy, you have something? Okay. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts?
And I'm just going to add this in really quickly, just because I know that this is going to be probably our largest point of contention, is that within this, it says it's based off of a 2.5 budget for operating. Again, that still has to be clarified with what Dr. Coleman was saying earlier, or someone said it earlier, about how that large pot is going to be broken up. So this is based on, back in May, what we had an understanding of what our budget would look like for when it became operating, and what will, the program that will thrive will evolve to. So this dollar amount is not set in stone. This was merely an example, but the idea is that instead of doing percentages based off of the organization size, we do the percentage based off of how much money we have to grant out that year. So let's say this is 200,000 for operating. I'm making this up. Then the 3 segments would be dependent on how much we can give the top 10, the top 20, the top 30. So that is not set in stone, and it is strictly just for an example of how we could break up money in the future.
Chairman Jester, let me ask Ms. Davis, and that is, this is an example. And so these figures have all been created for an example purpose. If we were to get something like 200,000 or 500,000 and not at all what we were anticipating, does this grant committee then come up with the 3 pockets, or how is that going to be decided?
I would assume so. So there's a formula that determined the $2.5 million breakdown. So whatever our budget is, we would just use the same one. So it wouldn't even necessarily be the grants committee. It would just be based off of the large dollar amount for our budget, and then we break it down. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Unlike the scenario that put us in this situation previously, this formula isn't dependent on a certain amount of money for funding. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also putting us in a position where we are not making any decisions about how much money we can give out until we have actually received it within our budget. So we're doing this off of a situation where we have the money in our coffers ready to go out, and the amount that we send out every year could possibly change, but the structure stays the same. Yeah. So.
Dr. Coleman, you have anything you want to add?
Just a little apprehension of the use of the word cancel, because that's not accurately what happened. And I think it's very important for us to know that and to understand that. There was a finding of by MHRC, and there was a process initiated. It is a binding process. And it was negotiated, and we are following the process outlined in the conciliation agreement. We have all learned that in some of our practices, we were non-compliant with Metro laws and rules and regulations, and part of the conciliation agreement is to rethink and revise how we're moving forward. We know with certainty Metro Arts cannot give award grants to individual artists. There are several proposals on hand articulated in the conciliation agreement, including perhaps finding a nonprofit that could do it. And there is also in the conciliation agreement discussion of legislative change at the council level to accommodate what needs to happen moving forward. So I just want us to be very clear about the language that we use, and also that the conciliation agreement puts parameters on all of us that can help sharpen our focus and reestablish our commitment to the fair and equitable distribution of taxpayers' money to grants for artists and arts organizations in metropolitan Nashville and Davidson County.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. And let it be said that this committee and commission is deeply grateful to you for the leadership that you're offering the commission now. Very much so.
So, Chairman Jester, based on what Dr. Coleman said, rather than use the word cancel, should the minutes say that the 201 Thrive Grant individuals will be asked to follow the process outlined in the conciliation agreement and rework their applications?
No, not necessarily, because that's not a decision for the committee to make. I know this is kind of semantics in terms of the words that we're using here. I would say that they are only just being voided within submittable because they're not ours to own anymore. As alone as Metro Arts, that is whatever the work group comes up with, that will be their decision fully. And right now, if I was an artist and I go into my submittable account, it'll say that it's pending decision, that it's an active application and that it's pending. Us sending out an email saying that these are being declined is quite literally the only way that we can remove them out of submittable, because that's just the capacity of the program itself. But us having this conversation here is to clarify that we are not declining them
Permanently.
We're not declining anything. We're just removing them out of this program because the program can only handle so much information at one time. Grants isn't the only department that uses submittable within Metro Arts. It's also public arts. It's also some comms information, some community engagement information. And just for the capacity of the program itself, we're reaching a limit. And so we're removing them for the sake of being able to clear up space within the submittable account itself, but that it is not a determinant for anything to happen in the future with those applications. Now, the operating applications, which we'll clarify, they will receive an email, as we've all determined, that where we have a proposal for a new process potentially, but until it is voted on, those operating applications will stay within submittable. So this is just housekeeping, cleaning up the account, because we can physically only keep so many applicants within the submittable system at one time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think you're saying that, to me, really helps anybody that's listening, because I think that's the language that needed to be expressed, although that's a pretty lengthy email.
Yeah, it will, and I'm going to say it very clearly. It will say declined, because that is just the extent that submittable allows us to respond to those applications. It will say deleted or declined. It is not going to say it in a language that I'm saying it right now, but we're just clarifying that that's not what it means. It is just the only way to remove it out of the submittable system.
Okay.
For the sake of being repetitive or redundant, there will be an email going out prior to any action being taken in submittable. We have had the experience on at least one or two occasions since I've been here, May 16th, where something just went out from submittable without preparation to our public and our constituents and our stakeholders that we want to minimize. We know its limitations, so now we have to be responsive to them.
Commissioner Lefkowitz.
I was going to suggest the word defer in some way as potentially appropriate. And then my second thought was that in terms of there's like the technical piece and then the messaging, that the communications or people be looped in terms of even perhaps doing like a press release or something with quotes from Sydney and Dr. Coleman, kind of a more robust explanation than an email. But we do have, people who can help with that messaging. It's just a suggestion as an observer.
A very important observer. Do we have any more questions or conversation around the operating grants restructuring and the process? I think we have our work set out for us between now and 2 commission meetings from now. With that, we'll move on to old and new business.
We need to finish this. Make sure we understand the code.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit, right?
Yeah,
But
the first one, not the second one. Just to clarify.
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
One of the other things is that we've mentioned Metro Code a few times and how we have to interact with Metro Council for getting a criteria. Obviously, we know we have the many different levels of approval just from committee to commission, CARE, MHRC, community stakeholders. That we understand. It's very vast, and we want to make sure that that's being implemented. But one of the biggest things are the two pieces of code. And so the first one that we have an understanding is that once we have criteria that has been voted on by commission, then we need to have that approved, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Tessa, but that has to be approved by resolution by council, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then one of the other questions that I want to just state publicly is the understanding that, let's say we have council approved criteria for the next cycle from whenever we have grant funding. Is that something that we have to do every year, or is that something that we only do when we change the criteria?
So as the code is written right now, if criteria is maintained from 1 year to the next, no changes, it does not need to go back before council because that criteria has been approved. If there are changes to the criteria, i.e. the way the grant editing panels are done, scoring, anything, that should go back before council to be approved.
Okay, and this has always historically been within the code and something that we should have been doing in years prior, correct?
Yeah, so there is legislative record of criteria being approved. I believe it's been since 2001. Obviously, the criteria has been edited the past, to my knowledge, at least 3 years. There's been a grant editing process which has changed criteria, so it should have gone before council, yes.
Okay, and I'm going to read you a little sentence out of here, and can you put this in layman's terms for us? It says, a notice shall be published in a newspaper of general circulation of the intent to make an appropriation to deserving nonprofit civic and nonprofit charitable organizations. Included within that notice shall be the amount of the appropriation and the purpose for which the funds will be spent. The grant contract shall then be submitted to the Metropolitan Council for approval by resolution at 2 consecutive regularly scheduled meetings of the Metropolitan Council. So I don't know about y'all, but I don't think we've put any of this in the newspaper. So can you clarify these last 2 sentences and why they might differ from the original, the top line criteria?
Yeah, so there's various sections of the Metro Code that are a bit antiquated and talk about publishing in newspapers, notices in newspapers. Generally, we've adapted that posting on a .gov website, a metro.gov website, or .metro, whatever, it is sufficient in lieu of a newspaper posting. So the past year and a half that I've been working with Metro Arts has posted who the grant or the applicants are, who was selected, and the amount of those grants, which has actually been very helpful in MHRC's work and diving into the history of grants. And so that is sufficient from legal's perspective, that it be posted in a publicly available website. So the second half of this, and I will try to make it as clear as possible, that the grant shall be submitted to the Metropolitan Council for approval by resolution at 2 consecutive regularly scheduled meetings of the Metropolitan Council. There is a state law, TCA 7-3-314, specifically D, which allows for metropolitan governments essentially to set up a commission or a board, and that commission or board can allocate funding without additional approval from the metropolitan legislative body, which would be the council. So that there's 2 parts here that we have to look at in conjunction with the code. One is the criteria, and one is the approval of the actual contracts. So Metro Legal has interpreted it to state that the criteria, the TCA that I talked about, does not preempt the Metro Code, that the criteria still must be approved by council. However, the TCA does preempt the portion where every single contract has to go before Metro Council.
What was that TCA site again?
Yeah. Yep, it's TCA 7-3-314.
And the
D.
Subsection D.
D delta.
So for us simple folks over here trying to read this code, criteria has to be approved by council.
Correct, that the state law does not supersede, preempt that portion.
And it's the reason why we have the understanding that even though it reads this within the code by itself, that the state law does preempt needing to have the contracts approved essentially a second time.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the contracts themselves, right, when we contract with every nonprofit that gets an operating grant, those do not have to go before council for individual approval via resolution. To reiterate that, the budget ordinance, which is BL 2024-373, if you scroll way down, you can control F arts, and you'll find where in the budget ordinance it talks about arts. It talks about appropriation for arts and arts organizations and conditioned upon the Arts Commission providing its annual report of grants funding as required by TCA 7-3-314D, which is the portion of the TCA that I just spoke about, and council approval for the grant award criteria as required by Metro Code 2.112040H. So again, the
Can
budget
you give that number again?
Yeah.
This one in your packet. That's the green one.
Is that the one I'm looking
It's the
at?
portion of the code that promulgates the Arts Commission
Okay.
and the authority that the Arts Commission has. And so the budget ordinance for FY25 reiterates the fact that as long as the annual report is submitted, which is promulgated by the Tennessee Code, that only then the criteria has to go before the Metro Council and not the actual contracts.
So the two times that we could potentially see council every year is if we happen to change the criteria and the annual report that we would need to give them during budget time.
Yeah, and so I truthfully can't speak to whether the annual report needs to go via
I'm not sure
resolution.
when.
I don't
Yeah.
believe it needs to. It just needs to be submitted to council.
Okay, yeah, and I think that was the understanding that we had as well, is that it can be sent by letter. But if outside of that, even though it states here, do you think we should change what it says within our code, or do you think we're supported by just the state law and the way that you've explained it today? Do you feel like there's a conversation that we need to have in the future that shares this?
Can you clarify your
Like,
question?
so right now, you're explaining it to us, right? And we're all in this room and we all have an understanding. I just want to make sure that in the future, there's not a conversation that needs to be had about our Metro Arts code changing to reflect what you're explaining to us now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously changing the code is more of a question for the council. That's more within their purview. Obviously, the commission could make a recommendation to amend the code. I will say, I think the code should probably stay the way it is, because if for some reason the Arts Commission is not submitting their annual budget, then the council has leverage to require the grants to go before them, the actual grant contract to go before them.
Yeah, and that's
for
how I'm more or
approval.
less, I'm not really asking it as a question, but more or less just stating that this isn't something that we need to change, but that this is the baseline for the decisions moving forward. Right?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the interpretation of Metro legal on how the state law and the Metro code is read in conjunction with one another.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Tessa.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Tessa. With that, we'll move on to old and new business. Dr. Coleman, would you like to update us about the Tennessee Arts Commission?
Yes, the only thing we have to say about the Tennessee Arts Commission is that we are working on the report that's a part of our implementation plan for the internal review. They want to know by October 1st what progress we have made in implementing the recommendations of the internal review. I have a conversation scheduled with them, and we're working on a response.
Any comments, questions? Thank you, Dr. Coleman. With that, I believe we have exhausted the agenda, and I would be willing to take a motion. Yes, go ahead.
Our next meeting is October the 14th at 12:30. More than likely, it will be here at Metro Southeast.
October the 14th at 12:30?
14th,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd be willing to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.